"That's him," Officer Dale Pruett muttered to himself, his eyes locking onto the man in dress blues standing near the baggage claim exit. "That's our guy." He said it the way a man says something he has already decided, not as a question, not as an observation requiring confirmation, but as the closing statement of a verdict reached before the evidence was examined. He said it the way men like Pruett had been saying things like it for the entirety of his 12 years in airport security, which was long enough to have made the saying of it feel like instinct rather than choice. He was wrong. He had been wrong before, but he had never been wrong in a way that cost him anything, which was the specific kind of wrong that teaches a man nothing. The man in the dress blues was standing near a concrete pillar at the far end of Terminal 3 at Chicago O'Hare International Airport on a Tuesday afternoon in October, when a storm front had grounded half the regional fleet and turned the terminal into a contained and restless sea of agitated travelers. The man was tall, 6'3" at least, broad across the shoulders in the specific way of someone whose physical dimensions were the result of sustained and purposeful work rather than genetics alone. He was wearing service dress blues that were pressed to a standard that did not happen by accident. Every crease a deliberate choice, every ribbon aligned with the precision of a man who understood that the uniform was not about him. His shoes were so clean they caught the terminal's overhead lighting in brief, moving reflections as people walked past. He was holding a phone to his ear, speaking quietly, one hand raised slightly in the universal gesture of someone managing a professional conversation in a public space. Pruett watched him from 30 feet away and felt the specific, familiar heat of a certainty he had learned to trust, a certainty built not on evidence or training or professional judgment, but on the accumulated weight of 1,000 small assumptions so habitual they had long since stopped feeling like assumptions at all. He began to move through the crowd. What happened in the next 12 minutes would be recorded on 7 separate cell phones, streamed live to 3 separate platforms, captured in full audio on a Pentagon secure line that was still connected in the commander's breast pocket, and reviewed. In the days that followed, by the Office of the Vice Chief of Naval Operations, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Chicago Police Department's Internal Affairs Division, and 3 separate federal prosecutors. Pruett did not know any of this. He knew only the heat of the certainty and the specific satisfaction of a man about to prove himself right. What came next? The sound of metals scattering across polished airport tile, the crack of a knee against a hard floor, the silence that fell over Terminal 3 in the moment after. The kind of silence that a crowd produces when it has witnessed something it cannot immediately categorize. None of it was what Pruett expected, but then, Pruett had stopped expecting to be surprised a long time ago. He had no idea what number was memorized in the man's head. He had no idea what would happen when that number was dialed. He had no idea that the phone in the commander's breast pocket had been connected. From the moment Pruett first said, "That's him," to a secure line in Washington, D.C., where people with considerably more authority than Dale Pruett possessed were about to hear everything, he had no idea at all. Commander Marcus Webb had been awake since 4:30 a.m. He had driven to O'Hare from the Navy's Great Lakes base north of the city, where he was 3 days into a 2-week training coordination assignment, the kind of desk work that came between deployments, necessary and unglamorous, the administrative connective tissue of a career spent in the field. He had been in his service dress blues since 6 a.m., which was not required for the drive but which felt correct for the occasion. He was going to see his daughter. Layla was 6 years old. She had her mother's eyes and his laugh, which was a combination that produced, in Marcus, a specific and defenseless kind of joy that 18 years of Navy SEAL training had done nothing to prepare him for. She had been at her grandmother's house in Washington, D.C., for 10 days, a visit that had been planned before Marcus's Great Lakes assignment came through, and that he had driven an extra 3 hours out of his way to accommodate. because the plan was that Layla would fly unaccompanied from Dulles to O'Hare, and he would be standing at gate K14 when she walked out. He had mapped the terminal 3 days in advance. He had called the airline twice. He had confirmed with Layla's grandmother that morning at 7 a.m. and then again at 8:45 a.m., when the gate agent texted him to say the flight was boarding on time despite the weather. He had arrived at the terminal 90 minutes before landing because he did not trust weather forecasts and because he was, by training and inclination, someone who arrived early enough to account for variables. He was standing near the concrete pillar at the far end of Terminal 3 because it offered a clear sightline to the Gate K corridor while being out of the primary pedestrian flow, a force of habit. The specific positioning instinct of a man who had spent 18 years in environments where knowing the layout of a room was not a preference, but a survival requirement. He had a plan for the next 3 hours. Layla would emerge from the gate with the airline attendant. He would take her bag. They would find the ice cream cart he had already located on his walk through the terminal. It was near the Hudson News. Bluebell brand. They had cookies and cream, which was her current favorite. And they would eat ice cream and walk slowly to the parking structure, and he would listen to everything she had to tell him about Grandma's house and the neighbor's dog and whatever had happened at school before the visit. And he would not check his phone once. He had not seen her in 2 months. The last time he had been home, their home, the house in Virginia Beach that he paid the mortgage on and lived in for a total of perhaps 60 days per year. She had drawn a picture of him in his uniform and put it on the refrigerator with a magnet that said "Home" in block letters. He still had a photograph of the picture on his phone. He had looked at it the night before more times than he was going to admit to anyone. He was thinking about the ice cream when the call from Lieutenant Commander Carlos Mendez came through. Mendez was the aide to Admiral Frank Kowalski at the Pentagon, and the call was about a logistics discrepancy in the training cycle budget. Ammunition allocation figures that didn't reconcile across 2 different departmental reports. The kind of administrative detail that required resolution before the end of the week, but that was genuinely low stakes in the broader sense of things. Marcus put in one earbud, left the other ear open to the terminal the way he always did in public spaces, and said, "Mendez, go ahead." He could hear Mendez pulling up the spreadsheet on the other end. He settled in against the pillar and let his eyes move across the terminal with the automatic. Unhurried scanning that 18 years had built into his nervous system, not looking for anything specifically, just remaining oriented in his environment. He noticed the cop coming toward him at roughly the same moment he would have noticed anything anomalous in a crowd, before it required noticing. At the peripheral level of awareness that preceded conscious attention, the cop was coming with the specific body language of someone who had made a decision and was in the process of executing it, the thumbs hooked into the tactical vest, the shoulders set forward, the pace that occupied more than its share of the surrounding space. Marcus tracked him without turning to look at him directly. He continued listening to Mendez's breakdown of the budget figures. He was aware of the cop the way he was aware of everything in his immediate environment, as data, as context, as a variable that might or might not become relevant. He was also aware, at the same peripheral level, of a small detail that he filed automatically. The body camera clipped to the cop's vest had no active indicator light. He was not recording. Marcus noted this the way he noted everything. He did not change his posture. He did not end his call. He had been in the Navy since he was 19 years old. He had joined out of a small city in Georgia, where the paths available to him had been visible from where he stood, and none of them had felt adequate to the scale of what he knew he was capable of. The recruiter had told him he was smart enough to be something. Marcus had thought, "I know." What he had not known was specifically what. And the Navy had. In the specific way of institutions that are good at identifying and shaping potential, answered that question comprehensively. He had passed BUD/S on his first attempt. He had deployed to Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, and 3 other places he was not authorized to discuss even in civilian conversation, he had received the Silver Star, the Bronze Star with Combat Vive device, the Purple Heart, twice, and a Presidential Unit citation that he had been present for the ceremony of, and had then returned to his locker and gone to the gym because there was a training cycle beginning the next day, and the citation did not change the training cycle. He had a daughter who drew pictures of him and put them on the refrigerator with a magnet that said, "Home." He had a career that had given him everything he was professionally, and that had cost him a marriage and large portions of the years his daughter had been growing through. And he had made his peace with this arithmetic in the specific way of someone who has not made his peace with it, but who has decided that making peace with it is not currently available, and who therefore moves forward. The scar on his neck, which was partially visible above his uniform collar, was from a piece of shrapnel taken outside Kandahar 4 years ago. The fragment had passed within 11 millimeters of his carotid artery. The surgeon who removed it had told him the margin without apparent awareness that this information would be of limited comfort to the recipient. Marcus had thanked him and asked when he could return to duty. He was thinking about Layla, about the ice cream cart near the Hudson News, about the picture on the refrigerator. He was listening to Mendez explain a discrepancy in ammunition budget figures that would require about 20 minutes to resolve. He had 22 minutes before Layla's flight was scheduled to land. He was not looking for trouble. He was never looking for trouble. Trouble, in his experience, did not require looking for. He had helped an elderly woman with her carry-on bag 18 minutes earlier. She had been struggling with a large piece of luggage near the escalator, and Marcus had simply picked it up and carried it to the check-in counter, because it was there and he was capable of carrying it and she was not. She had touched the gold stripes on his sleeve and said, "You look sharp, son." Navy? He had said yes, quietly, almost a whisper. He did not advertise the rest of it. The uniform spoke adequately for itself, and what the uniform did not communicate, the ribbons did. And what the ribbons did not communicate, the gold trident above his left breast pocket did, for anyone who knew how to read it. She had said, "God bless you." He had nodded and returned to his position near the pillar. He checked the departure board. Layla's flight, on time, Gate K-14, arriving in 21 minutes. He shifted slightly against the pillar, adjusted his earbud, and continued listening to Mendez. The cop was 12 feet away now and closing. Dale Pruett had been with the Chicago Police Department for 12 years, the last 8 of which he had spent in the airport division after a series of what his personnel file described, with careful bureaucratic neutrality, as excessive enthusiasm incidents in the patrol division, incidents that a less diplomatically worded assessment would have called what they were: unnecessary escalations that had produced 3 civil complaints, 2 departmental investigations, and a supervisor who had decided that putting Pruett in an airport was a way of minimizing the damage a man like Pruett could do while not quite being able to justify terminating him. The airport had its own problems. Pruett had adapted to them the way a man adapts when he does not adapt, but rather finds a new terrain in which to be the same person. He was 39 years old. He had been married once, for 4 years, to a woman named Sandra, who had left him when Layla, no relation to Marcus Webb's daughter, just a coincidence of names, was 2 years old, citing what she described in the divorce filing as a pattern of controlling behavior and an inability to acknowledge being wrong. Pruett had not contested this characterization. He had instead concluded that Sandra had been the problem. He had an older brother named Kevin who had served 2 tours in the Army and who was, by the accounting of everyone who had known them both, the better man in every measurable sense. Kevin had died in a traffic accident at 34, 6 years into a career as a police officer, a career that the people of his precinct had acknowledged with a memorial wall plaque and the kind of genuine collective grief that is distinct from professional obligation. Pruett had attended the memorial and had stood in front of the plaque for a long time. He had felt two things: loss and the specific, hollow awareness that the plaque was for Kevin and that there would never be a plaque for him. He wore his badge the way some men wear a claim. It was the most important thing about him, because it was the only thing about him that had authority. He had, on his desk at the Security Division office, an empty picture frame. He had bought the frame 2 years earlier intending to find something appropriate to put in it. He had not found anything. The frame remained on the desk, facing outward, which meant that whenever he sat at his desk, he was looking at the reflection of the room in the empty glass, which was a thing he had stopped noticing. The night before, he had read an article on his phone about stolen valor, civilians purchasing military uniforms from surplus stores, wearing them in airports and restaurants to solicit free drinks or upgrade requests, posing as heroes in a way that made Pruett's blood run hot in the specific way of someone for whom the concept of heroism is not something they have direct experience of, but something they believe they are uniquely qualified to defend. He had read the article twice. He had looked at pictures of fraudsters who had been caught, some of them in dress blues that were, to an untrained eye, convincing, but that, as the article helpfully explained, had telltale signs: wrong ribbons in wrong order, decorations from the wrong service branch, haircuts out of regulation, shoes that didn't have the right sheen. He had gone to sleep thinking about it. He had woken up thinking about it. He had failed the psychological evaluation for law enforcement on his first attempt 12 years ago, and had, on his second attempt, answered the questions differently, not falsely. Exactly, but with the benefit of knowing which answers the evaluators were looking for. His application had also listed 1 year of Army Reserve service that had consisted, in full, of attending basic training for 11 days before being separated for failure to adapt to a structured environment. This was described on his application as an honorable voluntary separation with appropriate dates. The background check had been processed by a junior analyst who had not flagged the discrepancy, in part because the date range was consistent and in part because the supervising officer, Roy Haller, had signed off on the hire without reviewing the underlying records in the specific way of a supervisor who does things quickly rather than carefully. Captain Haller was also the person who had reviewed and dismissed 3 of Pruett's excessive force complaints, and who had approved the transfer to the airport division, and who had, over 12 years, developed the specific institutional relationship with Pruett that consists of one person covering for another until both are in too deep to stop. Pruett had read the article about stolen valor, and he had come to work Tuesday morning already watching for it. He had walked the terminal once before, positioning himself near the departure screen, watching the flow of travelers with the specific attention of a man who had decided in advance what he was going to find. When he saw Marcus Webb at the concrete pillar, tall, broad-shouldered, dress blues pressed to a standard that Pruett could not himself meet on his best day, ribbons stacked in a configuration that Pruett did not recognize because he had no frame of reference to recognize it. Shoes that caught the light. He felt it. The specific heat of certainty. Too clean, Pruett thought. Nobody looks like that. He had not served. He had never deployed. He had never stood in a room where people with that configuration of ribbons had made the decisions that the ribbons represented. He had looked at pictures on the internet, and he believed, with the absolute sincerity of the genuinely ignorant, that he could spot the difference. He couldn't. He was looking at one of the most decorated active duty naval officers assigned to the Great Lakes region, a man who had 18 years of service behind every crease in those trousers, and he was seeing a fraud. The specific quality of envy that animated Pruett in this moment was something he would not have named envy if asked. He would have named it patriotism, or civic duty, or professional vigilance, but underneath those labels was the specific, hollow ache of a man who had stood in front of his brother's memorial plaque and understood. in his body if not in his mind, that the plaque was not something he would earn, and who had, in the absence of earning it, decided to become instead the person who protected it. He began to move. In his breast pocket was the same kind of nothing that had always been in his breast pocket. A pen, a folded piece of paper, the small, unremarkable contents of a man whose life did not require the carrying of significant objects. The pocket was empty of anything that mattered. In Marcus Webb's breast pocket, the phone was connected. Mendez was still on the line, pulling up a new spreadsheet, describing a column of figures. The call timer read 11 minutes and 43 seconds. Pruett walked toward the man at the pillar with the specific confidence of a man who had never been wrong in a way that cost him anything. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4 Alpha," Pruett said into his shoulder radio, not stopping his walk. "I've got a possible 103. One in progress at baggage claim 3. Male subject in Navy uniform. Suspicious demeanor. Going in for contact." The dispatcher's response was bored and automatic. "Copy. 4 Alpha." She did not ask for probable cause. She did not ask what suspicious demeanor meant in the context of a man standing quietly at a pillar while speaking on a phone. She copied and moved on, which was the specific institutional inertia of a dispatch desk that processed 200 contacts a shift and could not afford to interrogate all of them. Marcus heard the radio crackle. He registered it. He did not turn to look. Pruett stopped 2 feet from Marcus's position, inside his personal space, which was deliberate, and said, "Hey." Marcus did not respond. He was listening to Mendez describe a line item in a training budget spreadsheet. He held up one finger, the universal gesture of one moment, and tapped the side of his earbud. "Mendez, hold 1. I have a situation developing here." "Copy that, Commander," Mendez said. Marcus tapped the mute button. He did not end the call. He removed the earbud from his ear and held it in his hand and turned to face Pruett. "Can I help you, officer?" "You can start by telling me what you're doing loitering in a secure transit zone," Pruett said. His voice was louder than the situation required. Several people in the immediate area had turned to look. "Who were you talking to?" "I'm waiting for my daughter," Marcus said. His voice was the voice of a man who has managed high-stakes situations in environments where managing his voice correctly was the difference between resolution and escalation. It was calm in the specific way that calm is not the absence of assessment, but the result of it. "Her flight lands at gate K14. I was on a work call." "A work call." Pruett repeated this with the particular contempt of someone who considers repetition an interrogative technique. His eyes moved across Marcus's chest. The ribbons, the trident, the alignment of everything. "That's a lot of hardware for a man just standing around." "I'm a naval officer," Marcus said. "I'm in uniform because I came here directly from my duty assignment." "Navy SEAL?" Pruett said. And the way he said it was different from the way a person asks a question. It was the way a person makes an accusation while maintaining the grammatical form of a question. "That what the pin means?" "That's what the pin means." "Right." Pruett turned his head so that the people nearest to them could hear him clearly. "We got a Navy SEAL here. Folks." He turned back. "Let me see your ID." Marcus had been through enough of these encounters to know, with the precision of someone who has learned from experience, that the moment he handed over his ID was the moment he ceded the terms of the encounter. He also knew the law well enough to know that he was not required to hand it over. "I'm not being detained, and I haven't committed a crime," Marcus said. "I don't need to show you identification unless I'm being detained or suspected of a specific offense. I'm standing in a public area. Officer, I suggest you tell me what specific concern brought you over here, and we can address it directly." Pruett's face flushed. He was not accustomed to being answered in complete sentences by people he was questioning. He was accustomed to the specific compliance of people who do not know their rights, or who know them but are frightened enough to set them aside. "Refusal to identify," Pruett muttered, stepping closer. "That's my concern. You're wearing a federal uniform. That's my business." "It's your business if I'm not authorized to wear it," Marcus said. "I am authorized to wear it. I've worn it for 18 years. If you'd like to verify that, you have the authority to contact Naval Station Great Lakes directly. They'll confirm my assignment." "I've seen guys like you," Pruett said, and now his voice had dropped and sharpened, losing the performance for the crowd and finding something more personal underneath it. "I've read about the scam. Buy the costume at the surplus store. Come down here. Get into the Admiral's Club. Get free drinks. It's sick. It disrespects people who actually served." Marcus looked at him. He looked at him with the specific, patient attention of a man who has been in rooms with people who were genuinely dangerous and who can therefore accurately measure a threat. What he saw in Pruett's face was not danger. It was the specific, combustible combination of ignorance and ego, which was its own kind of hazard, but a manageable one if handled correctly. "Officer," Marcus said. His voice was quiet now, not submissive, but deliberate. The voice of someone who has decided that the crowd does not need to hear the next part. "I am Commander Marcus Webb, United States Navy. I'm asking you, respectfully, to step back. I am not a fraud. I am waiting for my 6-year-old daughter. I would like to do that without this becoming something it doesn't need to become." "Put your hands behind your back," Pruett said. "For what offense?" "Disorderly conduct, loitering, and suspicion of impersonating a military officer, which is a federal crime." "I am not impersonating anyone," Marcus said. "I am the person this uniform says I am. You are making a mistake." Pruett reached for Marcus's wrist. Marcus's arm was, in the specific physical sense, immovable. Not because he resisted. He did not pull back. He did not brace. He did not tense in any way that could be described as resistance. He simply held his position the way a concrete pillar holds its position when someone pushes against it. The arm was there. Pruett's grip had no effect on it. The crowd around them had stopped moving. The specific quality of stillness that a crowd produces when it has understood that something is happening, not necessarily what, but that the something is significant, had settled over the nearest 20 feet of Terminal 3. 7 phones were raised. Some of them were already recording. Marcus could see the departure board from where he stood. Gate K-1-4. Layla's flight. 15 minutes until landing. "Do not touch me, officer," Marcus said, quietly, for the record. Pruett let go of the wrist. He was breathing faster now. He had reached for that wrist with the expectation of the encounter's completion, of compliance, of the specific satisfaction of the moment when a person yields, and the arm had simply been there, unchanged, and the expectation had not been fulfilled. And what Pruett felt now was the specific, dangerous state of a man who has started something he cannot finish, and who is escalating because stopping feels like losing. "Resisting arrest," Pruett said. He stepped back. He put his leg behind Marcus's knee and shoved. Marcus could have stopped it. This was the fact that would occupy him later, not with regret, exactly, but with the specific weight of a calculation that had been made correctly, and that he would make the same way again. And that had cost him something real anyway. He could have moved. He could have caught Pruett's weight and redirected it with the casual economy of someone for whom this category of physical problem is not a problem. He could have done it in 2 seconds and left Pruett on the ground and walked away. and the 7 phones recording the encounter would have captured all of it. And then the 7 phones would have told a different story. SEAL attacks airport cop. He knew exactly how that went. He had seen it go that way for other people in other contexts, and he knew that the narrative once formed was difficult to correct, and that difficult was a word that meant possible, but at a cost he was not willing to pay. The cost was not his career, exactly. Or not only his career. The cost was the story Layla would grow up hearing about her father, which was a cost he was not willing to accept. So he took it. He turned his shoulder at the last moment, giving himself a better angle on the fall. He went down with controlled momentum rather than collapsing, a distinction visible to anyone who understood how a trained person falls versus how an untrained person falls, which was visible in the footage that existed later, and which Marcus would not need anyone to point out. He hit the tile with his shoulder, absorbing most of the impact. His hip hit next. His medals hit the polished floor of Terminal 3 with a sound that was specific and terrible, the metallic scatter of things that had been given for specific reasons at specific moments, now skidding across airport tile in a crowd of strangers. The silver star, the bronze star with V, the purple heart and its companion, the campaign ribbons, the gold trident that had been pinned to his chest by an admiral at Coronado after the most difficult 18 months of his life. A collective sound went through the crowd, not quite a gasp, something lower than that, something in the register of a sound that people make when they witness something they cannot immediately process. Pruett dropped his knee into the small of Marcus's back with the full weight of a 230-pound man. The impact sent a flare of white pain through Marcus's lower back that he identified and catalogued and set aside. His face was against the tile. He could smell the cleaning solution used on the floor. He could see, from this angle, the departure board across the terminal. Gate K-14. Layla's flight. 13 minutes. He could also see his phone, which had skidded across the floor when he went down. The screen was lit. The call timer was counting upward. "Stop resisting," Pruett was saying, loudly, for the cameras. "Stop resisting right now." Marcus was lying completely still. He was not resisting. He was facing down on a polished airport floor with 230 pounds of a man's knee in the small of his back. And he was breathing slowly and deliberately. And he was waiting. This was not passivity. This was the specific quality of patience that 18 years had produced in him. The patience of someone who has operated in environments where the timeline is not his to control and where the discipline to wait accurately for the moment when action becomes available is the difference between success and failure. He had waited in worse positions for longer periods. He had waited in positions where the things at stake were considerably more significant than his dignity in a public space. He was thinking about Layla, about the ice cream cart near the Hudson News, about whether she was frightened, flying alone for the first time, about the picture on the refrigerator that said home. He was also thinking about the phone on the floor, with its lit screen and its running call timer, and about the fact that Mendez was still on the line, and that Mendez had heard all of it. Pruett wrenched Marcus's arms behind his back with the specific, practiced force of someone who has done this many times to people who could not stop him. He applied the handcuffs. He ratcheted them tighter than protocol required. Marcus felt the metal bite into his wrists and noted it with the same professional detachment with which he noted everything about this encounter. "You're done," Pruett said, close to Marcus's ear. "I'm going to expose you to the world. You're going to rot in a cell tonight." Marcus took a slow breath. He tasted floor cleaner. He looked at the lit screen of his phone on the tile 3 feet from his face. He looked at the running timer. He looked at the departure board. 12 minutes. He turned his head slightly. carefully, in a way that could not be described as a movement toward resistance, and spoke. His voice was steady and even, with the specific quality of a man who is aware that everything he says is being recorded and who speaks accordingly. "Officer," he said, "my phone is evidence. You should pick it up carefully." Pruett reached for it with the irritated motion of someone dealing with an inconvenience. He looked at the screen. He saw the label on the active call. Pentagon. Logistics. He scoffed. "Right. You even renamed your contacts." He went to end the call. His thumb moved toward the red button. "Commander Webb." The voice from the phone was not the voice Pruett expected. It was not a voicemail or a recording. It was a voice, present, clear, alarmed, carrying the specific register of someone who has just heard a struggle through a phone speaker and has processed what it means. "Commander, this is Lieutenant Commander Mendez. Speak to me. What's your status?" Pruett froze. He had heard many voices in his 12 years. He had a sense for people who were performing authority and people who had it. This voice was the second kind. This voice was a man in an office with a secure line and a clearance and a chain of command above him that went somewhere Pruett did not have access to. "Who is this?" Pruett said into the phone, his voice less sure than it had been 30 seconds ago. "This is Lieutenant Commander Carlos Mendez, Office of the Vice Chief of Naval Operations, Pentagon, Washington, D.C. You are holding the phone of Commander Marcus Webb, United States Navy. Identify yourself immediately." The crowd around them had gone very quiet. Pruett could feel the weight of the 7 phones recording him with the spavic physical sensation of attention that feels like pressure. He cleared his throat. "This is Officer Dale Pruett, Chicago PD, Airport Division. Your commander is in custody for impersonating a military officer and resisting arrest. And you can drop the act because..." "Officer Pruett," the voice on the phone dropped half a register. It became very still. "You have made a catastrophic error. Do not hang up. Do not move, Commander Webb. And for your sake, Officer Pruett, pray that you have not injured him. I am patching in Admiral Kowalski. Stay on the line." Pruett stared at the phone, on the floor. Marcus turned his head just far enough to see Pruett's face. The specific progression of expressions across it, the initial dismissal, the first small crack of doubt, the doubt widening, was something Marcus had watched on other faces in other circumstances, and he recognized it for what it was. The moment when the certainty breaks. 12 minutes, Marcus said quietly, from the floor. His voice was not triumphant. It was simply informational. The voice of someone sharing a fact that the listener would shortly find relevant. "That's how long you have." Pruett stared at the phone in his hand the way a man stares at something that has changed shape without warning. He had been holding Marcus Webb's phone for 40 seconds, and in those 40 seconds it had transformed from a piece of evidence he had seized from a fraud into a live connection to an office at the Pentagon. And that transformation had not completed yet in his processing. He was still somewhere in the middle of it, still partially inhabiting the world in which he was the person taking down a stolen valor scammer. And the rest of the world had moved on without waiting for him to catch up. "Officer Pruett." The new voice was different from Mendez's. It was older. It carried the specific quality of authority that comes from decades of exercising it in consequential situations, a quality that is difficult to simulate and that Pruett, despite his 12 years of badge wearing, had never managed to produce in his own voice. It filled the phone speaker with a weight that the people standing nearest to Pruett could feel even from the outside. "This is Vice Admiral Frank Kowalski, United States Navy. I am the operational superior of the officer you currently have in custody. You will identify yourself fully." Pruett's hand was not quite steady. He could feel the lack of steadiness, and he gripped the phone tighter, which did not help. Around him, the crowd had not dispersed. If anything, it had grown. The 7 phones had been joined by 4 more. He was standing at the center of a ring of recording devices, and the ring was not going to get smaller. "Officer Dale Pruett," he said. "Chicago PD Airport Division, badge number 4922. Officer Pruett, I want you to understand your current situation clearly, because I am going to describe it to you once, and I am not going to repeat it." The Admiral's voice had not risen. It was the specific stillness of someone for whom raising his voice would be a concession. "The officer you have restrained is Commander Marcus Webb. He holds the Silver Star, 2 bronze stars with Combat Vi device, and the Purple Heart. He is currently attached to Naval Station Great Lakes on a training coordination assignment. He was on an authorized call with my office when your intervention began. My office has been listening to this entire interaction from its beginning." Pruett's stomach moved. "Furthermore, the phone you are currently holding is connected to a secure line that is recording this conversation for the official record. Everything you have said in the past several minutes has been captured and timestamped on a Department of Defense server." The crowd around Pruett was very still. Somewhere in the ring of phones, someone had turned on a recording app's external speaker, and the Admiral's voice was now audible to everyone within a 15-foot radius. "I am tracking Commander Webb's location through his phone's GPS. I have already contacted the Department of Homeland Security liaison at O'Hare. They are en route. I would strongly advise you to remove the handcuffs from Commander Webb immediately and step away from him. If you have injured him, if you have caused any physical harm to a senior officer of the United States Navy, the consequences will be federal in nature, and I will pursue them personally." Pruett's thumb was hovering over the red end call button. He had been hovering over it for 30 seconds. He could not make himself press it. Some part of him that was not the arrogant part, some smaller and more honest part, had already understood that pressing it would not end anything, that the conversation and everything in it already existed on a Department of Defense server, and that hanging up would only add "hung up on Admiral" to the growing list of things he had done in the past 4 minutes. On the floor, Marcus had not moved. His face was against the tile. His arms were behind his back. He was breathing with the slow, deliberate rhythm of someone who has made a decision about how to spend the time he is waiting through. From his angle on the floor, he could see the departure board. Gate K-14. Layla's flight, 9 minutes until landing. He could also see a shape moving at the edge of the crowd. An older man in a faded USMC baseball cap, leaning on a cane, pushing through the ring of bystanders with the unhurried determination of someone who has been in enough situations to know when his presence is required. The old Marine, Marcus did not know his name, would not learn it until later, would think about him many times afterward, pushed to the front of the crowd and looked at Marcus on the floor. He looked at the medals scattered across the tile. He looked at the gold trident among them. He turned to Pruett. "Son," the old Marine said. His voice was quiet and direct, the voice of someone who has not needed to raise his voice to be heard for a very long time. "I served in Da Nang. I know a ribbon rack when I see one. I know what a trident is." He pointed to the gold pin on the floor. "You don't buy that at a surplus store. You earn it in hell." He looked at Pruett with the flat attention of someone who is not interested in the performance of authority, only in its reality. "You better have a reason for this, son. A damn good one." The crowd murmured. Someone at the back said, "Let him up." Pruett looked at the phone in his hand. He looked at the crowd. He looked at the old Marine. He looked at Marcus on the floor, at the controlled, patient stillness of him, at the medals scattered around him, at the departure board visible past the ring of people. He keyed his shoulder radio. "Dispatch, 4 Alpha. I need backup. Terminal 3, baggage claim. Officer needs assistance." The dispatcher's voice came back. "Copy. 4 Alpha. Units are 12 minutes out." Marcus heard this. He heard the 12 minutes. He looked at the departure board. "Layla's flight lands in 8, he said, quietly, from the floor. Nobody answered him. The terminal hummed with its own noise around the specific silence of the immediate crowd. "I just want to be standing when she walks out," Marcus said. Not to Pruett, not to the Admiral on the phone, not to the crowd, just to the room, and to himself. The automatic doors at the far end of the baggage claim slid open. 2 people walked through them. They did not run. They moved with the specific, efficient speed of people who are executing a task they have trained for, close together, scanning the room, identifying the crowd concentration and the ring of phones and the man in dress blues face down on the floor and the airport cop standing over him with a phone in his shaking hand. They wore dark suits. Their credentials were on their belts. The badges caught the terminal's overhead lighting in brief flashes of gold. FBI. The lead agent was a woman in her mid-40s with short, dark hair and the compact and focused demeanor of someone who had been processing crises for long enough that the processing had become indistinguishable from calm. This was Special Agent Diana Ruiz, FBI Field Office, Chicago, and she had received a call from the Pentagon's duty officer 11 minutes ago and had been moving since. She scanned the room. She saw the crowd. She saw Pruett. She saw Marcus on the floor with his arms behind his back. She saw the medals scattered across the tile, the silver star, the bronze stars, the purple heart, the gold trident, lying where they had landed when he went down. She looked at them for 1 second with an expression that was not anger, because anger was not useful here. But that contained the information that she had seen what she needed to see and had formed her assessment of the situation. She did not look at Pruett first. She looked at Marcus. "Commander Webb?" "That's me," Marcus said from the floor. "I'm all right." She looked at Pruett. The look communicated nothing except professional attention, which was in itself a form of communication to anyone who understood what professional attention from a federal agent meant. "Unlock him," she said. "Excuse me?" Pruett's voice had regained a fragment of its earlier register, the automatic defensive posture of a man whose instinct is to assert authority even when authority has left the building. "This man is under arrest for..." "I am Special Agent Diana Ruiz, FBI." She showed her credentials. "You are interfering with a federal matter involving a senior military officer. Unlock him now, or I will arrest you for obstruction and assault on a federal asset." The crowd had grown absolutely still. The ring of phones was a forest of unblinking screens. Pruett's hands were shaking as he produced the key. He dropped it. It clattered onto the tile next to Marcus's face. The sound of it, small, metallic, the sound of something falling, was the loudest thing in Terminal 3 for the moment it lasted. "Pick it up," Agent Ruiz said. Pruett bent down and picked it up. His face was the color of chalk. He jammed the key into the handcuff lock. Click. Marcus did not scramble to his feet. He moved slowly, testing his back, rolling his shoulders, letting his spine register its own condition before he asked it to support his full weight. He had been in the small of his back by a 230-pound man. He knew what was there. He was not going to complain about it. He stood to his full height. He was a head taller than Pruett. He looked at Pruett once, a single, level look that communicated no anger and no triumph and no contempt, Just the specific, level attention of someone who has assessed a situation completely and moved on, and then looked away. He picked up his phone from where it had been placed. He put it to his ear. "Admiral, I'm secure." "Commander," Kowalski's voice came through loud enough for Agent Ruiz to hear. "Status? Minor contusions, back impact, nothing mission affecting." "Good. Stay put. The situation is being handled." "Copy that, sir." He ended the call. He crouched down, slowly, his back protesting, and began to pick up his medals from the floor. The silver star, the bronze stars, the purple heart, the gold trident. He handled each one with the same deliberate care with which he had placed them on his uniform that morning. Some were scratched. The trident's surface was marred where it had skidded across the tile. He noted this and said nothing about it. The old Marine in the USMC cap, Harold Webb. No relation. A man who had served 2 tours in Vietnam and who had been flying home to visit his granddaughter when he walked into Terminal 3 and seen what was happening, walked through the crowd and crouched next to Marcus. He picked up one of the bronze stars and held it out. Marcus took it. He looked at the old Marine. "Thank you," Marcus said. "Welcome home, son," the old Marine said. 4 words. He said them the way people say things they mean without needing to explain why they mean them. Marcus straightened. He placed the medals back in their positions on his chest as best he could, adjusting for what had been scratched and what had been bent, working quickly and precisely, the way a man works when he has something important to be ready for. He looked at the departure board, Chetike 14. The light above it had changed. "Arrived." He turned to Agent Ruiz. "Can you ensure this officer maintains a distance from me and my daughter?" "With pleasure, Commander," she said, and stepped between them. Marcus turned his back on Dale Pruett as completely and absolutely as a man can turn his back on something, which is to say, completely and absolutely, without drama or ceremony or any further acknowledgement of its existence. He walked toward Gate K14 with the specific, deliberate posture of a man who has been face down on an airport floor for 7 minutes and who is not going to let that be the last thing his daughter sees. The gate doors opened. Passengers streamed out, tired, disheveled, the loosened posture of people who have been sitting in a metal tube for 2 hours and are glad to be standing. An airline attendant emerged with a small girl, pink backpack, messy pigtails, a stuffed bear clutched in both arms, looking slightly overwhelmed by the size of the space and the size of the crowd. The small girl scanned the crowd. She was 6 years old and she had her mother's eyes, and she had been flying alone for the first time, and she was looking for one specific person. She found him. "Daddy?" She ran. The attendant let her go. She crossed the distance between them at the full speed available to a 6-year-old with a pink backpack and a stuffed bear, and she hit him at chest height with the force of someone who has no concept of the phrase, "be gentle." Marcus dropped to one knee, his back registering the motion in a way he would be feeling for the next 2 weeks, and put his arms around her and held her and closed his eyes. The smell of strawberry shampoo, the weight of her, the specific, particular weight of the specific, particular person. "I missed you," she said into his neck. "I missed you. I missed you. I missed you. I missed you too, baby girl," Marcus said. His voice did not break. He was a man of considerable discipline, but it was close. She pulled back to look at him. Her eyes went immediately to his chest, to the medals. Some of them scratched now, sitting slightly imperfect in their positions. She touched the gold trident. She looked at his face, at the uniform, at all of it. "Daddy," she said. with the absolute confidence of a 6-year-old making an important observation. "You look like a prince." Marcus laughed. "A real one. The kind that reaches the eyes. The kind that has nothing of the past 7 minutes in it. The kind that exists only in the present tense." "Something like that," he said. "Come on. There's ice cream." He lifted her onto his hip. She settled there with the ease of something finding its correct position. He turned toward the exit. The area around the baggage claim had been cordoned off. Standing outside the tape was a man in a white-shirted uniform that Marcus had not yet seen. The brass arrived. Chief Harold Fitch of the Chicago Police Department. And beside him, the airport's legal director. And between them, stripped of his tactical vest and his baton, standing very small in the way that people stand when the thing that made them large has been removed. Dale Pruett. He wasn't swaggering. His face was the color of old ash. Marcus looked at the scene for one moment, then he looked at Layla. "Daddy, why is that policeman in trouble? He made a mistake. Baby, a big one. What kind? He forgot the most important rule." "What rule?" "Treat people with respect," Marcus said. He forgot. He walked toward the exit. The crowd parted for him. Chief Harold Fitch had been running the Chicago Police Department for 7 years, which was long enough to have seen most categories of institutional crisis at least once, and which had not prepared him for this one. He had received the call from the Pentagon at 3:47 p.m., 12 minutes after the incident began. The caller had been a Pentagon public affairs officer whose voice had the specific, carefully modulated quality of someone delivering information that has already been determined to be uncontainable and is being shared as a professional courtesy rather than a request for assistance. He had received a second call, 2 minutes later, from the mayor. He had been in the terminal for 4 minutes when Marcus Webb walked out of the gate with a small girl on his hip. He watched Marcus walk toward him. He watched the child on the hip. He watched the scratched medals and the imperfect alignment of the ribbons and the specific, controlled posture of a man who was in real physical pain and was not going to allow it to be visible in front of his daughter. He watched all of this and he felt, along with the professional urgency of the situation, something personal, the specific discomfort of a person who understands, looking at a situation, that whatever is about to be said is not going to be adequate. He extended his hand. "Commander Webb, I am Chief Fitch, on behalf of the Chicago Police Department. I want to offer—" "Chief?" Marcus said. His voice was quiet and even. He adjusted Layla on his hip. "My daughter is 6 years old. She doesn't need to understand what happened in the last 20 minutes. So we're going to keep this brief, and we're going to keep it quiet." "Understood," Fitch said, lowering his voice. "I've spoken with Admiral Kowalski and with the mayor. I want you to know that this is being treated with the full seriousness it deserves. Officer Pruett is being taken into custody as we speak. He is suspended without pay, effective immediately." From behind the tape, Pruett's voice. "It was a misunderstanding. He wouldn't show ID. He resisted—" "Silence." Fitch turned, and the single word carried enough weight to produce the silence it requested. He turned back to Marcus. "Commander, I apologize. Sincerely. This officer violated 4 separate use-of-force protocols. He assaulted a senior military officer without cause. He disgraced the badge." "Chief," Marcus said, "I appreciate the apology, but an apology doesn't fix my uniform, and it doesn't fix the fact that my daughter almost walked out of a gate and found her father face down on an airport floor." He looked at Fitch steadily. "I want him charged, formally, assault and battery, false imprisonment, by the book. Chief, no administrative leave, no internal review that goes nowhere. Charged. We will conduct a full—" "Agent Ruiz," Marcus said. Without turning to look at her, she was standing 4 feet behind him. Commander, the Admiral mentioned federal jurisdiction. If the Chicago PD declines to pursue charges, Ruiz said, stepping forward, the FBI will classify this as assault on a federal asset during the exercise of his duties. We will take jurisdiction. The federal sentencing guidelines for assault on a military officer are considerably more severe than the state equivalent. Chief Fitch looked at Ruiz. He looked at Marcus. He looked at Pruett behind the tape, who was standing with the specific immobility of someone who has stopped expecting the situation to improve and has begun simply waiting for it to be over. Sergeant Morris, Fitch said to one of the officers behind him, take Officer Pruett into custody. Suspend him without pay. Effective now. Charge him with aggravated battery and official misconduct. Process him tonight. Chief, you can't, Pruett started. One more word, Fitch said. And I add obstruction. Pruett closed his mouth. 2 sergeants moved to him. The handcuffs came out. His own handcuffs, taken from his belt when his tactical vest was removed. The sound of them closing around his wrists was the same sound that they had made around Marcus Webb's wrists 7 minutes earlier. In this same terminal, on this same floor. The symmetry was precise. The crowd, which had been very still during the exchange between Marcus and Fitch, erupted in the slow, building way of crowds that have been holding something and release it together. Not applause, exactly, something less performative. The sound of people who have witnessed something and are processing it collectively. Layla watched the sergeants lead Pruett away. She looked at the handcuffs. She looked at her father. Daddy, she said. Are those his own handcuffs? Yes, baby, Marcus said. Did he put handcuffs on you? A pause. He made a mistake, Marcus said again. She considered this with the focused attention that 6-year-olds bring to information they have not yet categorized. Does making a mistake mean you get handcuffs? Sometimes, Marcus said. When the mistake is a big one and you hurt someone. Yes. She looked at the medals on his chest, scratched and imperfect now, their surfaces marked by the airport tile. She touched the trident carefully. Did he hurt you? A little, Marcus said. I'm okay. She looked at him with the assessment of someone who is not old enough to accept reassurance at face value, but who loves the person saying it enough to extend provisional trust. Okay, she said. Can we still get ice cream? Marcus looked at Harold Fitch. Chief, am I free to go? Please, Fitch said, and the word carried all of its weight. Commander, the airport legal director stepped forward. We would be prepared to offer. I'll be in touch through my attorney, Marcus said. Good evening. He walked toward the exit. Agent Ruiz fell in beside him for the first 20 feet, then peeled off to manage the scene. The old Marine in the USMC cap was standing at the edge of the crowd as Marcus passed. He didn't say anything this time. He just watched, with the specific attention of someone who is looking at something he wants to remember accurately. Marcus met his eyes and gave him a single nod, and the old Marine nodded back. And they were even. Outside, the storm that had grounded the regional fleet had moved east. The evening air was cold and clean, and the lights of the parking structure were yellow and warm. Layla said, Is the ice cream cart inside or outside? Inside, Marcus said. We have to go back in. Okay, she said. Let's go. He was limping slightly. The impact to his back was making itself known in the specific way of things that will be much worse by morning, and he was carrying her on his hip, and he was walking back into Terminal 3 to find an ice cream cart near the Hudson News. And none of the things that had happened in the past 40 minutes were going to make that more difficult than it already was. By the time Marcus and Layla were in the hotel room, eating room service pizza and watching a nature documentary about penguins that Layla had chosen with great deliberateness, the video had been online for 4 hours. 3 separate clips from 3 separate phones, all uploaded to the same platform within 15 minutes of each other. The clearest one, taken by a teenager in a gray hoodie who had been standing 12 feet from the concrete pillar, showed the full sequence. Pruett's approach, the exchange, the leg sweep, the knee, the medals on the floor, the crowd's collective stillness, the old Marine's intervention, the FBI agent's arrival, the handcuffs coming off. It ran 4 minutes and 27 seconds, and it had, by the time Marcus ordered the pizza, accumulated 3 million views. He did not watch it. He knew what was in it. He did not need to watch it. Layla fell asleep at 9:15 with her head on his shoulder and the stuffed bear under her arm. He sat with her weight against him for a long time, watching the penguins navigate a storm on a nature documentary, feeling the specific, gathering pain in his lower back that told him the impact had been more significant than he had allowed himself to register at the time. He thought about the medals on the floor. He thought about the old Marine crouching next to him and handing back the Bronze Star with the matter-of-fact care of someone who understands what the object represents. He thought about Layla saying, "You look like a prince." He thought about Pruett's face when the handcuffs closed around his wrists. He did not feel joy about this. He felt the same thing he felt after every completed mission, not triumph, which required an emotional investment in the outcome that professionals could not afford, but the specific, flat relief of something resolved. The threat had been present. The threat had been neutralized. The work was done. His phone had been vibrating steadily for an hour. He had turned it face down on the bedside table. Kowalski's office would handle the communications. That was what the chain of command was for. Across the city, in the dimly lit apartment on the northwest side where Dale Pruett had been released on his own recognizance, the station had processed him by 8 p.m., charged him with aggravated battery and official misconduct, and released him pending arraignment. A different kind of night was happening. Pruett sat in his recliner. His tactical vest was gone. His badge was gone, surrendered at the station as part of the suspension process. His phone was in his hand, and on the phone was the video, and he had watched it 11 times. Each time he watched it looking for the thing that would make it look different, the angle, the frame, the moment that would reveal the context the video had cut. He could not find it. The video was 4 minutes and 27 seconds of him walking toward a man at a pillar, escalating a non-existent situation, knocking a military officer to the ground, and pressing his knee into the man's back while yelling, "Stop resisting," at someone who was lying completely still. The comment section was a waterfall he had stopped being able to read after the first scroll. His phone rang. Unknown number. 202 area code. He answered it. The voice was fast and smooth and promised him prime time. "We think you're being railroaded. Grant, the woke military agenda. We want to hear your side tonight. Live." Pruett sat up straighter in his recliner for the first time in 2 hours. "I'll do it," he said. "I want to get paid." He had rehearsed the story during the drive to the studio. He had a narrative. The man was aggressive. He was shouting. He made a move toward his waistband. Pruett feared for his life and for the safety of the terminal. He had a victim frame. He was being persecuted. The Navy was covering for one of their own. The video was missing context. He had a righteous frame. He was just doing his job, protecting the public. Nobody was saying thank you for that. He believed all of it by the time he sat down under the studio lights. This was the specific quality of Pruett's self-knowledge. He could convince himself of things quickly and completely. And then, he could not tell the difference between conviction and accuracy, because in his experience they had always been the same thing. He was in makeup when he felt for the first time in the evening. Something approaching hope. The host's name was Gerald Thorne, a man whose career had been built on the premise that the media was biased against people like his guests, a premise that served him professionally regardless of whether the guests were being misrepresented or not. Because the premise was never about the truth of the specific case, but about the general atmosphere the premise generated. Thorne welcomed Pruett on air with the warmth of a man who had already decided the narrative and was ready to execute it. "The video starts late," Pruett said, settling into the leather chair, finding the rhythm of his rehearsed account. "What you don't see is this man. He was aggressive. He was raising his voice. He refused to show identification. In this climate, with everything that's happening in airports, I can't take chances." "So you felt he was genuinely posing a threat to the terminal?" "Absolutely. He made a move toward his waistband. I used necessary force to neutralize a potential shooter. I'm the victim here. The Navy is trying to save face because their guy was acting like a threat." Pruett felt the forward momentum of the narrative. He had done it. He was turning it around. He was the victim. Then, Thorne paused. He touched his earpiece. His expression changed, not all at once, but in the sequence of a man receiving information and processing it, and then recalculating everything he had just been saying. "Grant," Thorne said, looking down at a tablet on his desk with an expression that was no longer sympathetic. "We're getting something here. The Pentagon has just released the audio recording of the phone call Commander Webb was on during the incident. It was recorded on a Department of Defense secure server. We're going to play a clip." The studio speakers came on. Pruett heard his own voice. It was not the voice he remembered, or rather, it was the voice he remembered, but stripped of the context he had constructed around it in his own mind. Without the context, the voice was what it was. A man escalating a situation that did not require escalation, speaking over a calm response with increasing volume, manufacturing urgency in the specific way of someone who needs the situation to be what they have decided it is. He heard Marcus say, "Officer, I am Commander Marcus Webb, United States Navy. I'm asking you, respectfully, to step back. I am not a fraud. I am waiting for my 6-year-old daughter." He heard himself say, "Put your hands behind your back." He heard Marcus say, "For what offense?" He heard himself say, "Disorderly conduct, loitering, and suspicion of impersonating a military officer." He heard Marcus say, "I am not impersonating anyone. I am the person this uniform says I am. You are making a mistake." He heard the sounds of the struggle. He heard Marcus's controlled grunt of pain when the knee went in. He heard himself say, "Stop resisting. Stop resisting right now." He heard the silence afterward, which was the silence of a terminal of several hundred people watching. The studio was very quiet when the clip ended. Thorne looked at Pruett. The sympathy was gone. The calculation was visible in its place. The calculation of a man who has just understood that he is sitting across from someone whose story has collapsed on live television, and who does not want to be associated with the collapse. "Grant," Thorne said, and his voice had dropped the warmth completely. "You told me he was shouting profanities. The tape shows him speaking calmly and identifying himself by name and rank. You told me the video was missing context. That audio contains the entire encounter from before you approached. There's no missing context." "It's doctored," Pruett said. He stood up. His voice had gone past desperate and arrived somewhere near animal, the specific sound of a cornered thing. "That's AI. It's a fake. They're framing me. I'm a good cop." It was released by the Department of Defense with a full digital chain of custody. Thorne said flatly, "Sit down." No, I'm not." Cut his mic. Thorne said to the producer. Pruett's mouth kept moving. No sound came out. The camera panned away as security moved toward the set. He was walked out the back of the studio into a rainy Chicago alley, his mic still attached to his lapel. His face the face of a man who has just lost the last thing he was holding on to and does not know what comes next. He checked his phone. The hashtag Pruett lied was trending first nationally. He walked to his car. He sat in it. The rain was coming down on the windshield and he sat in it for a long time. The Internal Affairs interview room at CPD headquarters was gray and windowless and smelled of the specific institutional combination of stale coffee and industrial cleaner that Marcus Webb would have recognized from a dozen similar rooms in a dozen different contexts. Had he been the one sitting in it? He was not. Dale Pruett was. Pruett sat across a metal table from Captain Roy Haller of Internal Affairs, a man who had, over the past 8 years, developed the specific professional relationship with Pruett that consisted of one person absorbing the consequences of another person's behavior in exchange for the institutional stability that the arrangement produced. Haller had reviewed 3 of Pruett's excessive force complaints and dismissed all 3. He had approved the airport transfer. He had, on one occasion, personally intervened with a complainant's attorney to prevent a civil filing. None of this had been worth the trouble it was now costing him, but cost assessments of this kind are generally available only in retrospect. Beside Haller sat JAG Officer Thomas Vance, in Navy service khaki, whose presence in an Internal Affairs interview room was itself a statement about the level at which the Department of Defense was taking this. Officer Pruett, Haller began. His voice had the careful, distanced quality of a man separating himself from the conversation in real time. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. I can't afford an attorney, Pruett said. His voice was flat. He had not slept. His eyes had the specific quality of someone who has been staring at a wall for a long time. The union dropped me. Then a public defender will be appointed. Haller slid a folder across the table. Before we proceed to the criminal charges, we need to handle your employment status. We reviewed your personnel file this morning. Pruett looked at the folder without opening it. We found 6 prior complaints of excessive force. Haller continued. 3 were formally dismissed. 3 were, he paused on the word, resolved informally. We are now reviewing those resolutions. What Haller did not say, but what was visible in the specific way he was not looking at Vance, was that the review of those resolutions would include the question of who had conducted them and whether they had been conducted appropriately, which was a question that had the specific quality of a question whose answer was already known by everyone in the room. Vance opened his own folder. He laid it on the table and turned it toward Pruett. Mr. Pruett, he said, we ran a background verification on your original police academy application from 12 years ago. You listed 1 year of Army Reserve service. Pruett's jaw tightened fractionally. We contacted the Army Reserve Records Office in St. Louis this morning. They have no record of honorable service for a Dale Pruett. They have a record of a Dale Pruett who attended basic training for 11 days in the spring of that year and was separated for failure to adapt to the structured environment. The separation was not honorable. It was administrative. Pruett did not speak. Your application listed this as an honorable voluntary separation. Vance continued. It was not. Your application was, therefore, materially false. Vance turned another page in his folder. We also found, in the application package, a psychological evaluation clearance that was issued by a private contractor. We contacted that contractor this morning. The individual who signed the clearance retired 2 years ago under circumstances involving credential irregularities. We have reason to believe the clearance was not based on a genuine evaluation. Haller looked at his own folder. He was very still. Mr. Pruett, Vance said. Do you understand what this means? Pruett's hands were flat on the table. I wanted to be a cop, he said. His voice was different now, not the voice he used in confrontations, not the voice that had been recorded on a Pentagon secure line telling a senior military officer he was going to rot in a cell. Just a voice. That's all. I wanted to be a cop. Mr. Pruett. Pruett's throat moved. The materiality of the fraud on your application means that your employment with the Chicago Police Department was initiated under false pretenses. Every arrest you conducted may be subject to legal challenge. Every use of force may be re-examined in light of your unauthorized status. Your pension and benefits are subject to forfeiture. You are looking at criminal charges for fraud on the application in addition to the assault and misconduct charges from yesterday's incident. I just wanted people to respect me, Pruett said. It came out before he could stop it, without the defensive framing he would have added 2 days ago, without the self-justification. Just the sentence, plain, the actual thing underneath all the other things. Vance looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the folder and closed it. Respect is earned, Mr. Pruett, he said. Commander Webb earned his in Kandahar and Helmand and a dozen other places he's not authorized to discuss publicly. You tried to take his in front of his child, in a public space, with 7 phone cameras recording. He stood up, gathering his files. That is the definition of stolen valor, not the uniform, the act. He looked at Haller. Haller was looking at the table. Captain Haller, Vance said, I believe you have some additional matters to discuss with Mr. Pruett. He left. The door closed. In the silence that followed, Haller looked at Pruett across the metal table, and Pruett looked back, and they sat together with the specific, shared weight of 2 people who have been in an arrangement that has now collapsed and who can see, looking at each other, exactly how the collapse happened and who is going to bear most of its consequences. Roy, Pruett said. Stand up, or Dale, Haller said. You're under arrest. The Cook County Courthouse on California Avenue was a building that communicated its purpose through the weight of its materials. The stone facade, the heavy doors, the specific institutional density of a space where many things had been decided, most of them irreversible. The trial of People versus Dale Pruett had been assigned to courtroom 4B, which was the largest available room and was still too small for the number of people who had requested seating. It was 6 months after Terminal 3. The storm front that had grounded the regional fleet was long gone. The days had lengthened and then contracted again, and Chicago had moved through seasons with the indifference cities have for the specific dramas occurring within them, and the trial had arrived on schedule. Marcus Webb sat in the front row of the gallery. He was not in uniform. He wore a charcoal gray suit, the suit of a man who is here as a person rather than as a symbol, who is here because it is necessary and not because it is a performance. His back still ached in the specific way of something that had been injured and had healed, but was not going to let itself be entirely forgotten. He sat straight anyway. Beside him sat Admiral Frank Kowalski, who had flown in from Washington. His presence was not accidental and was not understated. The Vice Chief of Naval Operations does not attend a state criminal trial without communicating something about the institutional weight behind the proceeding. And Kowalski understood this and had factored it into his decision to be here in person. On the other side of Marcus, in the aisle seat, sat a woman in her late 60s whom Marcus had met once before, at the studio where his medals had been sent for repair. A woman named Mrs. Patricia Fogarty, whose son had been arrested by Dale Pruett 3 years earlier for disorderly conduct in this same terminal, a charge that had been dropped but not before Mrs. Fogarty's son had lost a job offer that had been contingent on a clean background check, and not before Mrs. Fogarty herself had spent 4 months navigating an appeal process that had cost her $3,000 and produced no acknowledgement of wrongdoing from anyone. She had reached out to Marcus's legal team. She was here because Marcus had asked her to come, and because her son's case was part of the record. Dale Pruett sat at the defense table. His attorney was a public defender, a young woman named Andrea Vega, competent and overworked, who had reviewed the evidence over 2 weekends and had told Pruett with the specific directness of someone who respects their clients enough not to mislead them. The audio is the case. Everything else is commentary. She was right. The prosecution had 3 prosecutors, the lead ADA from Cook County, a federal co-prosecutor from the U.S., attorney's office handling the civil rights component, and, by special permission of the court, a JAG officer in an advisory capacity. They had the Pentagon audio, unedited, 47 minutes of which had been certified by the Department of Defense with a complete digital chain of custody. They had the body camera footage from 2 different airport officers who had arrived after the incident and documented the scene. They had Marcus's medical evaluation, which showed 2 bruised vertebrae and extensive contusion to the lower back, consistent with a blunt force knee impact. They had the testimony of 11 witnesses from the terminal. They had the video. They also had Pruett's own testimony. He had taken the stand in his own defense on the 4th day of the trial and had spent 3 hours being cross-examined about the distance between what he had said under oath and what the audio recording showed had happened. By the end of the 3rd hour, the jury's faces had the specific expression of people who have stopped listening to the words because the words have become irrelevant. Marcus was called to the witness stand on the 3rd day. He wore the gray suit. He sat in the box with the same posture he had maintained throughout everything. Straight, present, both hands on the railing. The prosecution asked him to describe the incident. He did, in the same precise, sequential language he had used in every official account. The approach, the exchange, the fabricated probable cause, the leg sweep, the knee, the medals on the floor. Then the prosecutor asked, "Commander Webb, when you told Officer Pruett you were making a mistake, what did you mean?" Marcus looked at the jury. He looked at 12 people who had been listening for 3 days to audio recordings and video footage and medical testimony, and who were looking back at him with the specific quality of attention that indicates a question has been asked that the listener actually wants the answer to. "I meant that he thought I was nobody," Marcus said. A man in a dress uniform, standing at a pillar, waiting for his daughter. Tall, black. Ribbons that he'd decided were wrong. And he had decided, before he crossed the room, what I was. He had decided the ending before he asked the question. He paused. I've been in places where people made decisions about what I was before they asked the question. I've been in those places in countries where the stakes of being wrong were immediate and physical and final. I've learned to live with it as a professional reality. But this was an airport in Chicago. This was the terminal where my daughter was about to walk out of a gate. And the man who knocked me to the floor was not in a war zone making a split-second tactical decision. He was bored, and he had a badge, and he had gotten away with it before. He looked at Pruett. Pruett was looking at the table. He said something to me when the handcuffs went on. He said I was going to rot in a cell. He said he was going to expose me to the world. A pause. My daughter walked out of Gate K14 and saw her father standing in dress blues with the chief of police offering an apology. She said I looked like a prince. He looked at the jury. What she didn't see was what happened in the 7 minutes before that. Because the most important thing I did in those 7 minutes was make sure she wouldn't. That's the mission I was on when he approached me. Not a Pentagon call, not a military assignment. Getting to the gate on time. The courtroom was very quiet. He called me a nobody, Marcus said. I want the record to reflect that nobody is a nobody. Every person standing in an airport has the same rights. Mrs. Fogarty's son had the same rights. The rights don't change based on what the person is carrying in their pocket. He looked at Mrs. Fogarty in the gallery. She met his eyes. She nodded once. That's what I meant when I said he was making a mistake, Marcus said. He was making the specific mistake of a man who has confused authority with truth. The cross-examination was brief. Andrea Vega, Pruett's defender, asked 3 questions. She asked whether Marcus had identified himself immediately upon Pruett's approach. Marcus said he had asked the reason for the approach before producing identification, which was his legal right. She asked whether refusing to immediately comply with an officer's request contributed to the escalation. Marcus said that an officer approaching a person with no probable cause does not have a legal basis for demanding identification, and that his exercise of his legal rights could not constitute contribution to an unlawful escalation. She asked if Marcus had any sympathy for a police officer trying to do a difficult job in a complex environment. Marcus looked at Pruett. I have sympathy for anyone trying to do a difficult job well, he said. That's a different thing from what happened in Terminal 3. Vega had no further questions. The ADA stood for redirect. He asked one question. Commander Webb, what was in your other pocket during the incident? Not the phone. The other one. Marcus reached into the breast pocket of his suit jacket. He produced a small, folded piece of paper and held it up. A picture, he said. My daughter drew it before the trip. She put it on the refrigerator with a magnet that says home. I photographed it and printed a copy to carry. He unfolded it carefully. A child's drawing, a figure in blue with yellow decorations on the chest. Too many fingers. A large smile that took up most of the face. The ADA looked at the jury. No further questions. The jury deliberated for 5 hours and 40 minutes. The foreperson was a retired high school principal named Gloria Reyes, a woman who had spent 31 years evaluating the gap between what students said and what they meant, and who had spent 5 days in that courtroom applying the same evaluation to the evidence in front of her. She read the verdict in a voice that was steady and clear and that did not require the room to be quiet for anyone to hear it, because the room was already quiet. Guilty on the charge of aggravated battery. Guilty on the charge of official misconduct. Guilty on the charge of false imprisonment. Guilty on the fraud charges related to the application. Under a separate indictment that had been tried concurrently. Pruett did not visibly react to the first 3. His face had the specific stillness of someone who had been preparing for the words and had now received them. On the 4th, the fraud, something happened in his jaw, a minute tightening. The specific physical response of someone hearing confirmed something they have been telling themselves was not true. Andrea Vega put her hand on his arm. He looked at it. He did not speak. Judge Elena Vargas had been on the bench for 22 years, long enough to have developed the specific patience of someone who has seen most configurations of human failure and who does not require drama to engage with them. She looked at Pruett over her reading glasses. She set down the case file. She looked at it for a moment more before she spoke. Mr. Pruett, please stand. He stood. His cheap suit hung slightly loose on him. He had lost weight during the trial. In 22 years on this bench, I have seen officers make mistakes. I have seen decisions made in genuine fear, in genuine confusion, under genuine pressure. Those cases are difficult. This case is not difficult. She picked up the case file and set it down again. You walked across a terminal and you targeted a man because he did not match your expectation of what someone in that uniform should look like. You manufactured a threat. You fabricated probable cause. You assaulted him while he was compliant. And when you were caught, you went on national television and lied. You lied in detail, with preparation, with the full intention of altering the public record of what you had done. She leaned forward slightly. You were not a police officer making a difficult call. You were a bully in a uniform you had obtained under false pretenses, doing what bullies do, to someone you believed could not stop you. You were wrong about the could not stop you part. But that is not why you are in front of me. You are in front of me because what you did was wrong regardless of whether the person you did it to could stop you. She picked up her gavel. On the charge of aggravated battery. I sentence you to 4 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. On the charge of official misconduct and false imprisonment, 2 years each, to run consecutively. On the fraud charges, 3 years, to run consecutively. Total sentence, 11 years. The gavel. You are ordered to pay restitution to Commander Marcus Webb in the amount of $175,000 and to the Fogarty family in the amount of $45,000 for documented losses resulting from the wrongful arrest 3 years prior. Future wages will be garnished at 40% until the debt is paid. You are permanently barred from employment in security or law enforcement. She looked at Pruett over her glasses one more time. The bailiffs will take you. The sound of the handcuffs, when they closed, was the same sound it always was. The specific ratcheting click of a mechanism doing what it was designed to do. Pruett was walked up the center aisle of courtroom 4B. He did not look at the gallery as he passed. He looked straight ahead with the specific, sealed attention of someone who has decided that looking at the people present will not serve him. Marcus watched him pass. He felt what he expected to feel. Not triumph, not joy, not the rush of righteous satisfaction. The specific, flat finality of something done. A threat assessed, managed, neutralized, a mission completed. He looked at Mrs. Fogarty beside him. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her face had the specific expression of someone who has been holding something for a long time and has now been permitted to set it down. Not relief. Exactly. Something more complicated. The specific emotion of someone who has received justice and found that justice, while necessary, does not undo the thing that required it. She looked at Marcus. "Thank you," she said, "for including us." "Your son's case was part of the record," Marcus said. "It should have been part of it from the beginning." She nodded. They sat with that for a moment. Admiral Kowalski leaned over from Marcus's other side. "The Pentagon Public Affairs Office wants a statement," he said. "They'd like you to tell them I'll send something in writing," Marcus said. "I have somewhere I need to be." He looked at his watch. He had a flight back to Virginia Beach at 6 p.m. He had requested shore duty, a Pentagon assignment overseeing training protocols. 2 years minimum. No deployments. The request had been approved the week before. He had called Layla from the hotel the night before to tell her, and she had said, "Does that mean you're going to be home?" And he had said, "Yes, for a while." And she had said, "Okay," in the tone of a 6-year-old who has received important information and is processing it carefully. He stood. He put on his jacket. He walked out of courtroom 4B into the hallway and then out of the courthouse into a Chicago afternoon that was cold and bright. The kind of day that comes in November when the storms have moved east and the air is clean and everything is exactly what it appears to be. He pulled out his phone. He had one call to make before the airport. The phone rang twice. "Daddy?" "Hey, baby girl," Marcus said. He was standing on the courthouse steps in the November afternoon, his hands in his jacket pockets, his breath making small clouds in the cold air. "How was school?" "We did fractions," Layla said. "I didn't like them." "They get better," Marcus said. "That's what my teacher said." "She's right. I have a flight tonight. I'll be home tomorrow morning." A pause on the other end, the specific quality of a 6-year-old processing a timeline. "For how long?" "For a long time," Marcus said. "I told you. New job." "At the Pentagon?" "At the Pentagon." Another pause. "Do they have ice cream there?" Marcus smiled. "A real one. The kind that reaches the eyes. The kind that has no performance in it." "I'll find out," he said. "I'll ask around." "Okay," Layla said, with the satisfied finality of a negotiation successfully concluded. "Bye, Daddy. Bye, baby girl." He ended the call. He stood on the courthouse steps for another moment, looking at the street below, at the city moving through itself with the complete indifference cities have to the specific things happening inside them. A cab, a delivery truck, a woman pushing a stroller, the ordinary, unexamined traffic of a November afternoon in Chicago. He thought about the gold trident, which was now repaired, the surface mended, the scratch filled and polished by a craftsman at the naval base who had worked on it for 2 days and had refused payment and had handed it back to Marcus and said only, "Good as new." Marcus had looked at it and thought, "Not quite. Better than new. Now it has history." He thought about the old Marine in the USMC cap, crouching next to him on the airport floor to hand back a Bronze Star. He had tried to find the man afterward and had been unable to. He had simply been someone passing through, flying home to someone, carrying his own history in a faded baseball cap. He walked down the courthouse steps. He had a cab to catch and a flight to make and a daughter to get home to. 6 months later, in a cell at the Stateville Correctional Center in Joliet, Illinois. Dale Pruett's mail arrived on a Tuesday. He received it twice a week now. Not much, and less as the months passed. The people who had initially written out of loyalty or sympathy or morbid interest had mostly moved on to other things. In the Tuesday mail was a single envelope with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping, torn carefully from the Chicago Tribune. He looked at it for a long time. The headline, "Commander Marcus Webb promoted to captain at quiet Pentagon ceremony." Below it, a photograph, a ceremony on the lawn of the Washington Navy Yard. A man in dress blues with a small girl standing beside him, one hand in his and the other touching the new insignia on his collar. The girl was grinning with the gap-toothed grin of a 7-year-old who has lost a front tooth recently and has not yet fully accustomed herself to the gap. The man was not smiling broadly. The specific, contained expression of someone who is very glad and who expresses gladness in his own way. Pruett looked at the photograph for a long time. He put it on the small shelf above his bunk, propped against the wall. He did not know who had sent it. He would not know for a long time. He thought, on some days, that it had been sent to cause him pain, and on other days that it had been sent as the specific, wordless communication of someone who wanted him to understand what he had failed to destroy. He was not sure those were different things. He looked at the photograph every morning. He did not understand exactly why. He only knew that he needed it to be there. The repaved road through Jericho County? No? That is a different story. This story is set in Chicago. On the flat November streets of a city that keeps moving. Dale Pruett's first parole review is scheduled for year 3. His attorney, the public defender assigned to his case after Andrea Vega moved to another district, has advised that the review will be complicated by the fraud conviction. His union membership was revoked the day after the verdict. His condo went into foreclosure while the trial was ongoing. His ex-wife, Sandra, declined to comment to the reporter who called her. The airport division at O'Hare is under new supervision. Captain Haller retired during the investigation, citing health reasons, which was the specific retirement that occurs when an institution decides that a quiet departure is preferable to a loud one. 3 of Pruett's prior use of force cases were reopened and reviewed. 2 produced settlements. The old Marine who had pushed through the crowd and crouched next to Marcus on the airport floor, Harold Webb, no relation, a retired factory worker from Rockford, Illinois, who had been flying home from a visit with his granddaughter, was contacted by Marcus's attorneys 6 weeks after the incident and asked if he would testify. He said yes without hesitation. He testified on the second day of the trial for 11 minutes, in the specific, unhurried manner of a man who has decided to tell the truth and does not need preparation for it. He said he knew what the ribbons were. He said he knew what the trident was. He said he knew that you don't buy those things. He said, "I served my country. So did that man on the floor. I wasn't going to walk away from that." He said nothing more than was required. It was more than enough. Marcus Webb took his Pentagon assignment in December. He was home for Layla's 7th birthday in February, the first birthday he had been present for in 3 years. She wanted to eat cake for breakfast and watch cartoons, and he agreed to both, and they sat together on the couch in the house in Virginia Beach and watched a cartoon about a small yellow bear for an hour. And Marcus could not have told you afterward what the plot was or what the bear wanted, because he was watching Layla watch it. And that was sufficient. The picture was still on the refrigerator. The magnet still said home. He was a man who had kept a promise. He had kept it on a polished airport floor, handcuffed, with his medals scattered around him and his daughter's flight arriving in 12 minutes. He had kept it by choosing, when choosing mattered, to wait rather than fight, to document rather than react, to trust the system he had served for 18 years to do what it was designed to do. The system had done it, slowly, imperfectly, with the specific grinding weight of institutions under pressure, but it had done it. He had kept the promise. That was the whole of it. That was the only part that mattered. The crowd around them had developed its specific shape, the shape that crowds take when they have understood that something is happening that requires witness. Not a mob, not a riot, just people who had been moving and had stopped moving, their trajectories altered by the gravitational pull of the confrontation at the pillar. They stood in the uneven ring that crowds form when they are close enough to see but far enough to maintain the psychological distance of the uninvolved. Marcus could read crowds. He had been trained to read them, and he had read them in contexts considerably more consequential than Terminal 3 of O'Hare International Airport. He read this one: curious, engaged, not hostile, not frightened, primarily oriented toward the phones they had raised to document what they were witnessing. The phones were a fact about the moment, not a threat and not a comfort, just a fact. Everything was being recorded. This was useful to know. He could also read Pruett, the way you read people, when you have spent your career reading people whose intentions and capabilities directly determine whether you come home. What he read in Pruett was the specific combination that was in some ways the most dangerous kind. A man who had committed to a position and whose ego was too large to let him uncommit, even in the face of mounting evidence that the position was wrong. This kind of person does not de-escalate because they cannot, because de-escalation requires the acknowledgement of error, and the acknowledgement of error requires a relationship with one's own fallibility that Pruett did not have, which meant the situation was going to go further before it stopped. Marcus had 3 choices. He could produce his identification immediately and end the confrontation at its current level, but producing identification under these circumstances, to an officer who had no lawful basis for requesting it, was a concession that established a precedent he was not willing to establish, and that would In any subsequent account of the incident, make it appear that Pruett's approach had been justified. He could escalate verbally, which was the approach that felt most natural given the rising heat of the situation, but that would, on camera, look like exactly what Pruett wanted it to look like. Or he could do what he was doing. Hold his position, speak clearly, maintain the record of a man exercising his legal rights in the face of unlawful pressure, and wait. He was very good at waiting. He had waited in positions that made this look comfortable. The departure board, visible over the left shoulder of the nearest phone camera. Updated. Gate K14. Arrived early. He recalculated. Layla might be walking out of the gate in 6 minutes rather than 9. This changed his timeline, but not his calculus. He held his position. Pruett said, "You're wearing a federal uniform. That makes it my business. I've seen guys like you buying a costume at the surplus store, coming down here to get free meals." "Officer," Marcus said. He lowered his voice, not to hide the words, but to communicate that he was not interested in performing this for the crowd, that he was addressing Pruett directly as one professional addressing another in a situation that had not yet been irretrievably altered. "I have served in the United States Navy for 18 years. I have held this rank for 4 years. The uniform is not a costume. The identification in my pocket confirms everything I have told you. I am asking you to call Naval Station Great Lakes. The number is publicly listed, and verify my assignment before this becomes something it doesn't need to become. Call the base." Pruett repeated it with the contempt of a man who has heard an excuse and is cataloging it as such. "Sure. And while I'm doing that, you slip out the door?" "I'm not going anywhere," Marcus said. "My daughter is landing at gate K14 in approximately 6 minutes. I'm not going anywhere." Something moved across Pruett's face. Not doubt, not yet, but the first awareness of a possibility he had not previously considered, that the man in front of him had a reason to be here that had nothing to do with a scam, a reason that was specific and human, and that Pruett's certainty had not left room for. It passed. He covered it with the specific motion of a man reasserting a position, the straightening of the spine, the widening of the stance, the adjustment of the hand toward the utility belt. "Last time," Pruett said, "hands behind your back." What happened next happened in the specific way that things happen when a person has made a decision and commits to it, without hesitation, without escalation, exactly as determined. The airport legal director had the specific bearing of someone whose professional training had equipped her to manage this category of situation and whose personal experience of it was nevertheless producing something in her face that the training had not fully prepared her for. She had managed civil liability situations at O'Hare for 8 years. She had managed incidents involving intoxicated passengers, physical altercations, equipment failures, and a medical emergency involving a sitting congressman. She had not managed this. "Commander Webb," she said, stepping forward with a folder already open. "The airport and the city are prepared to offer a comprehensive—" "Not tonight," Marcus said. He looked at Layla on his hip. She was watching the legal director with the focused attention of a 6-year-old encountering an adult who is speaking in a way that children recognize as important without understanding why. "My daughter is 6, and she's been on a plane for 2 hours and she wants ice cream. Whatever needs to be addressed can be addressed through my attorney." The legal director absorbed this. "Of course, we have a car available to—" "No, thank you," Marcus said. "We'll walk." He turned toward the exit. Agent Ruiz fell in beside him. "Commander," Ruiz said, quietly enough that Layla couldn't hear. "The IA investigation will be opened formally tomorrow morning. Captain Haller's office will be contacted regarding the prior complaints. We've already flagged the application discrepancy. JAG will be involved in that piece." Good, Marcus said. The prior complaint, Mrs. Fogarty's son, we're pulling that file. If the original stop had the same pattern, it gets reopened. It had the same pattern, Marcus said. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. He had read the account that Mrs. Fogarty had sent to his legal team, and the pattern was not subtle. We'll need your statement tomorrow. My attorney will be in touch. He paused at the edge of the cordoned area. Agent Ruiz, the audio from the Pentagon call, the full recording, not just the clip. We've already requested it, Ruiz said. The Department of Defense certified it this afternoon. Complete chain of custody, 47 minutes. Good, Marcus said again. Make sure it's available to the press as well as the prosecutors. Both. Ruiz looked at him. You want it public. I want the record to be complete. Marcus said, people should hear what happened, not a clip, the whole thing. He walked toward the exit. The old Marine was standing near the automatic doors, waiting. He had not left. He had a flight to catch, and he had stayed anyway. Leaning on his cane, his USMC cap pulled low against the terminal's recycled air. Marcus stopped in front of him. Thank you, Marcus said, for what you said. The old Marine looked at him with the specific attention of someone who has been around long enough to take the measure of a person quickly and who has taken Marcus's measure already. In the moment he saw him on the floor. My name's Harold Webb, the old Marine said. No relation. He said it before Marcus could register the coincidence of the surname, with the small, practiced acknowledgement of a man who had been making that clarification his whole life. I served 2 tours. I know what that trident means. Took a good man to earn it. Yes, Marcus said. It did. He looked at the trident, scratched now. Its surface marked by the terminal floor. The scratch was visible in the specific way that damage is visible when it falls on something that was previously perfect. My son wants to go to BUD/S, Harold Webb said. It came out simply, without pride or performance, just as a fact being shared between 2 people who understand the weight of it. He's 22. Tell him it's worth it, Marcus said. Is it? Marcus thought about the deployments. He thought about the specific weight of 18 years. He thought about Layla on his hip, her strawberry shampoo and the stuffed bear and the gap-toothed grin she would have at her next birthday. He thought about the refrigerator and the magnet. Yes, he said. Tell him it's worth it. Harold Webb nodded. He stepped back. He was going to catch his flight. He had a granddaughter waiting in Rockford. Daddy, Layla said. She was watching Harold Webb with the focused assessment of a 6-year-old who has absorbed more of this evening than her father realizes. Is that man your friend? He is now, Marcus said. He walked through the automatic doors into the November evening, in the makeup chair. Pruett had felt the first real hope he had felt since the handcuffs went on. The makeup artist worked on his forehead with a powder puff, absorbing the sheen that had been accumulating since he left the precinct. The studio smelled of hot lights and coffee, and the specific chemical smell of television sets everywhere, a smell Pruett had never personally encountered before, but that he recognized. From television, as the smell of places where important things were said by important people. He was about to be an important person saying important things. He ran through the account one more time. He had rehearsed it in the car on the way over. The man was aggressive, voice raised, hands near his waistband. The specific climate of the airport post 9/11, the duty to protect the public, the good faith of his response to a perceived threat. He had a victim frame. He was being persecuted by an institution closing ranks around its own. He had a righteous frame. He was just doing his job. He believed it. That was the important part. Not that it was true, but that he believed it, because the gap between believing something and it being true was not something Pruett had ever developed the ability to navigate. He had spent 12 years mistaking his certainty for accuracy, and the habit was too deep to abandon in the 40 minutes between the precinct and the studio. "Mr. Ramsey," the makeup artist said. She had his name wrong. She'd been told the wrong name by the assistant, but Pruett didn't correct her because it made him feel, briefly, like someone else's problem. "You're good to go." He walked to the set. The lights were very bright. He had not been on television before, and the brightness was physical, pressing against him. He settled into the leather chair and felt, for the first time in 2 days, the specific sensation of being in control. He crossed his legs the way he had seen people cross their legs on television. He looked at the host with the expression of a wronged man. The show went to air. He got through the first 2 minutes. He said his lines. The host was sympathetic in the aggressive, practiced way of a man who uses sympathy as a weapon. He asked questions that allowed Pruett to elaborate, that gave his narrative room to establish itself, that positioned the story as the one Pruett needed it to be. And then the host touched his earpiece. Pruett saw it happen, the slight pause, the fractional shift in expression, the moment when the host's face underwent the specific transition of someone receiving information that requires a recalculation of everything that has just been said. He watched it happen, and he felt, before he understood what was causing it, the specific chill that precedes a bad thing arriving. The audio began to play through the studio speakers. He heard himself for the first time from the outside. That was the part he had not been prepared for. He had heard the audio in his head, the way you hear your own voice in your own head, which is always a version of it that makes sense in context, that has the explanatory framework attached, that is connected to the interiority from which it came. Hearing it through the studio speakers was different. The studio speakers gave him the audio without the interiority, just the voice, just the words, just the sequence of what was said and when. He heard Marcus say, "Officer, I am Commander Marcus Webb, United States Navy. I'm asking you, respectfully, to step back." He heard himself say, "I've seen guys like you." He heard Marcus say, "I am not impersonating anyone. I am the person this uniform says I am." He heard himself say, "Resisting arrest?" He heard the sounds of the fall. He heard his own knee going into the small of a man's back. He heard his own voice saying, "Stop resisting," to someone who was not resisting. He heard himself, from the outside, for the first time. It was not what he had heard from the inside. He had thought about calling ahead when the assignment came through. He had thought, "Layla is in Washington. I will be at Great Lakes. The distance is manageable." He had not called ahead because calling ahead would have required explaining the assignment in terms that civilians could process, and the assignment was classified in ways that made it difficult to explain without either lying or oversimplifying. And he preferred not to do either, particularly not to his daughter's grandmother, who was a sharp-eyed woman of 71, who had been listening to him explain things for 20 years, and who had a talent for identifying the spaces between the words. He had instead driven 3 hours south to collect Layla himself and 3 hours back, on a Friday, and spent Saturday morning helping Layla pack a pink backpack and a stuffed bear with the specific, focused attention of a man who is trying to do a small thing correctly because the small thing is important. He had driven her to Dulles on Sunday and stood at the security checkpoint and watched her walk through it with the airline attendant and not turn around. She had promised she would not turn around. He had told her turning around made it harder. She had nodded with enormous seriousness, and she had not turned around, and he had stood there until she was through security, and then he had walked back to his car and driven to Great Lakes and told himself, for the duration of the 2-hour drive, that she was fine and that he was fine and that everything was fine. He was not unaffected by this. He was very much affected by it, but he had a capacity for operating while affected that was professionally speaking, his most valuable attribute, and he applied it now as he applied it always, not suppressing the feeling, which he had learned did not work and produced its own costs, but contextualizing it. The feeling was real. The operational requirement was also real. Both could coexist. He had been living at that intersection for 18 years. He had a photograph of Layla on his phone. Several photographs, as a practical matter, because phones could be lost or damaged or confiscated, which was why he also had the printed picture in his breast pocket that he had been carrying since Sunday evening, folded carefully and placed there with the specific deliberateness of a man who knows that the objects he carries in a uniform pocket are the objects most likely to survive intact if other things do not. He had not looked at the photograph since the Virginia state line on Sunday, not because looking at it was painful, but because he was saving it. He would look at it when he was standing at gate K14 and Layla was walking out. That was the correct sequence. The photograph was for the waiting, and the waiting was almost over. Mendez was explaining the third column in the budget spreadsheet, something about a procurement code that didn't align with the training cycle allocation. And Marcus was listening with one ear and tracking the terminal with the other and monitoring the departure board and thinking about the ice cream cart near the Hudson News and not thinking about Sunday at Dulles and the way Layla had not turned around. The cop was 10 feet away. The prosecution's first witness on day one was Mrs. Patricia Fogarty. She was 67 years old, a retired school librarian from the northwest side of Chicago. And she walked to the witness stand with the deliberate composure of someone who has been preparing for this specific act for 3 years and has therefore arrived at it without nervousness, only with the specific, focused attention of someone who knows what they need to say and has decided to say it. She described the incident involving her son, James, who had been 24 years old at the time. He had been at O'Hare to pick up a colleague arriving from Houston. He had been waiting near the baggage claim, near the same concrete pillar where Marcus Webb would stand 3 years later, in the same section of the same terminal. On a Tuesday afternoon, he had been on his phone. He had been wearing a jacket that James himself had described in his account of the evening as nothing special, a regular jacket, brown, not expensive. Officer Pruett had approached him with the same pattern, the accusation of loitering, the demand for identification, the escalation when identification was produced, and the encounter did not end immediately. The encounter had ended with James on the ground, charged with disorderly conduct, processed at the precinct, released at 2 a.m. The charge was dropped 6 weeks later for lack of evidence. In the intervening 6 weeks, James had been required to disclose the pending charge to a background check for a data analytics position at a financial services firm that had conditionally offered him employment. The offer was withdrawn. He had found other work, eventually, but at a lower salary and in a different city. And the process had taken 8 months and had cost him money he did not have for a lawyer who had secured the dismissal and charged for the service. Mrs. Fogarty described this sequence quietly and in order, without editorializing, without anger in her voice, which was not the absence of anger, but the specific, mature form of it that has been refined by 3 years into something that did not require volume to be effective. "My son did nothing wrong," she said. "He was standing at a pillar in an airport, waiting for someone. He had not been asked to leave. He had not been causing any disturbance. He had not done anything that would provide a lawful basis for the approach. He was approached because he was black, and because he was young, and because he was calm when questioned, which the officer appeared to interpret as suspicious rather than as the natural behavior of a person who was not doing anything wrong." She looked at the jury. 3 years later, reading about Commander Webb in the newspaper, I recognized the description, the pillar, the approach, the accusation, the ground, the same terminal, different day, She paused. "I called Commander Webb's legal team because I wanted someone to know that this was not a single incident. It was a pattern. My son was not a commander with medals and a Pentagon connection. He was a 24-year-old accountant waiting for his colleague. That should have been enough." The prosecution also called the department's Human Resources Director, Sandra Morales, to testify about the application process that had admitted Pruett to the force 12 years earlier. She was specific and clinical. The discrepancy in the service record, the psychological evaluation that had been processed by a contractor whose certification was subsequently found to be irregular, the supervising officer who had signed off on the hire without reviewing the underlying records. She described this with the careful neutrality of someone testifying about institutional failures she had not personally caused and does not personally defend, and whose professional obligation is to describe them accurately. When the ADA asked her what the standard background check process should have revealed, she said, "The standard process should have flagged the service record discrepancy and required verification from the Army Reserve Records Office. That verification would have revealed that the service listed on the application did not match the record. And if the verification had been completed, Mr. Pruett would not have been admitted to the academy." The ADA let that sit for a moment. 12 years ago, he said. 12 years ago, she said. The jury heard the arithmetic of this clearly. 12 years of stops, 12 years of encounters, 12 years of complaints filed and reviewed and dismissed by Captain Haller, who had reviewed the application and who had signed off on the hire and who was now, as of 6 weeks into the trial, himself under investigation. The defense's case lasted 2 days. Andrea Vega was competent and she was honest with her client, and she presented the case she had available to present, which was not a strong case, but which was not nothing. She emphasized the genuine difficulty of airport security work, the genuine reality of stolen valor as a documented phenomenon, the genuine split-second nature of assessments made under the specific pressure of a post-9/11 security environment. She presented character witnesses, 2 former colleagues who described Pruett as a dedicated officer, and a use-of-force expert who testified that the leg sweep Pruett had used was within the technical parameters of department training. A testimony that the prosecution addressed on cross-examination by establishing that the training specifies the leg sweep as a response to active resistance, which the evidence showed was not present. She put Pruett on the stand on the 4th day. She had advised him not to, but he had insisted, in the specific way of a man who believes that his account, delivered personally, will accomplish what the documents and footage have not. He had been wrong about similar things before. Under cross-examination, the ADA asked him one question that the jury came back to in the deliberations. "Officer Pruett, what information did you have? At the moment you approached Commander Webb, that constituted probable cause for an investigative stop?" Pruett said, "He looked wrong." The ADA did not follow up. He sat down. The jury deliberated for 5 hours and 40 minutes. 3 of those hours were spent, according to the foreperson's account given to a journalist afterward, discussing not the law, but the photographs and the audio, going through them together, listening to the voices, establishing the sequence. The foreperson said, "We needed to hear it in order. We needed to understand what happened when." When they came back, they were not looking at the defense table. They were looking at the foreperson. And when the foreperson read the verdict, she did not pause between the counts. She read them as what they were: a sequence, a document, a record. There had been a period, early in his airport assignment, when Pruett had genuinely tried to do the work correctly. He had read the operating procedures. He had attended the required trainings. He had spent 3 months conducting consensual contacts by the book, identifying himself, explaining the reason for the approach, accepting a no and moving on. He had been, during those 3 months, a police officer in the functional sense of the term. He had not been good at it, not because the procedures were difficult, they were not difficult, but because following them required a continuous act of restraint that his psychology was not built for. Every encounter in which he approached someone and asked a question and received a polite answer and had to accept it and walk away left him with the specific, unresolvable feeling of something incomplete. He had the authority to investigate, and investigation without consequence felt like waste, like a door that could be pushed open being left closed. He had, over the months that followed, adjusted. He had adjusted in the specific, unconscious way of people who modify their behavior in response to internal pressure rather than external principle, which is to say that the modification was not a decision he was aware of making. He simply found, over time, that certain kinds of encounters produced the satisfaction that the procedurally correct encounters did not. And he drifted toward those encounters the way people drift toward the things that make them feel effective, without examining what the feeling actually cost. He had read the Stolen Valor article the night before, and he had gone to sleep thinking about it and woken up thinking about it. And he had come to work Tuesday morning with the specific preoccupation of someone who has a theory they want to test. This was not, in his own accounting, anything other than diligence. He was going to find the fraud if there was one, and if there was not one, he would have wasted 15 minutes, which was a reasonable cost for the diligence. He had not considered the possibility that the diligence was not what he believed it to be. He had not considered the possibility that the theory was working backward from a conclusion, that he had looked at a tall black man in a perfect uniform and had decided the uniform was fraudulent and was now looking for evidence, rather than approaching without a conclusion and looking for facts. The distinction between these two things was one that his training had described in terms he had understood abstractly but had never applied to himself. The empty frame on his desk, the brother's memorial plaque, the specific, hollow awareness that had visited him in front of it. He had covered these things with the badge, and the badge had made them manageable, and the manageability had been its own kind of answer. He walked toward the man at the pillar with the heat of the certainty in his chest, which was the only warmth he had. The Admiral's voice had a specific quality that Pruett would think about later, in the cell at Stateville, on the days when he permitted himself to go back through the evening and look at it clearly. He would think about the specific quality of authority in it, not the performed authority of a man asserting a position, not the compensated authority of a man using volume to substitute for weight, but the actual authority of someone who has spent decades making decisions that had consequences and who had therefore developed, through the accumulation of those decisions, a voice that communicated them without effort. He had not heard that kind of voice aimed at him before. He had been on the wrong end of supervisors, of police chiefs, of legal threats, but those voices had been managing him, which was a different thing. The Admiral's voice was not managing him. The Admiral's voice was informing him, the way a weather forecast informs, here is the condition, here is what it means, here is what you should do. And the decision about whether to do it is yours, and the consequences of your decision will be precisely what I have described. Pruett's thumb had hovered over the end call button for 30 seconds. He had not pressed it. He had not pressed it not because he had made a decision, but because his hand had stopped obeying the part of him that wanted to press it, which was the part that was still inhabiting the version of events in which he was the person taking down a fraud. The rest of him had already begun the process of understanding that he was not in that version of events, that the version of events was not the one he was in, that the version of events he was in was considerably less comfortable. He had looked at the phone. He had looked at the running timer. He had looked at Marcus on the floor, the medals scattered, the carefully pressed trousers against the airport tile, the controlled, patient breathing of a man who has decided to wait. He had looked at the old Marine, who was looking at him with the flat attention of someone who has decided not to intervene and who is communicating. through the specific quality of his non-intervention, exactly what he thinks of what he is watching. He had said to the phone, I was just... Officer Pruett, Admiral Kowalski said, and the patience in his voice was more frightening than anger would have been. I have federal agents en route to your location. I am asking you to use the next several minutes to consider carefully whether the account you are currently constructing of this incident is the account you want to be the one that exists on a Department of Defense server. Because it will be. Every word you have said in the past 11 minutes is on that server. The crowd around them had not moved. The picture was still on the refrigerator. The magnet still said home in block letters that Layla had chosen because they were her favorite color, which was red, and which Marcus had placed at her eye level because she had told him she wanted to be able to see it without standing on her toes. He came home on a Wednesday morning in December, 2 days after the courthouse steps and the call to Layla and the flight back to Virginia Beach. He came home to the specific, ordinary welcome of a house that has been well tended in someone's absence. The cat asleep on the couch, the mail collected, the heat at a sensible temperature. He stood in the kitchen for a moment, looking at the refrigerator, at the picture, at the magnet. He put his bag down. He would unpack it later. He went to the refrigerator and opened it and looked at what was inside. The ordinary contents of a family refrigerator, organized by someone who understood that he would be home and had therefore made sure there was food. Layla's grandmother had come down the week before to set things up. He made a note to call and thank her. He made coffee. He stood at the kitchen window looking out at the backyard, winter bare. The garden his ex-wife had planted still holding the structure of itself even without the green. A Japanese maple, a rosebush that came back every year, the specific permanence of perennial things. He had a Pentagon meeting on Friday. He had a daughter who was 7 years old and who was going to lose her second front tooth sometime in the next 3 weeks. According to a detailed update delivered by phone the previous night, he had a kitchen and a coffee maker and a window looking out at a Japanese maple. He had kept his promise. That was the whole of it.